summer sun, utterly useless gadgets, and one very hot dog. During the winter I wrote a 2-page article for the Post about the virtues of owning a camper van. And as we move into summer, I have cleaned the grill and am already planning journeys to pastures new across the British Isles. What makes this year different for me is the discovery of BritStops, a fabulous online concept that enables camper and motorhome owners the opportunity to camp free of charge on over 371 farms and vineyards across the country, and in the process sample local produce. It is an exchange of sorts with no obligations either way. The television series One Man in His Camper Van has been shown several times, but this sort of holiday existence is nothing new, not least of all those that drive classic campers. With the weather being as warm as it has in recent weeks, I packed all the essentials and with my young son took a leisurely drive up to the Derbyshire border to meet up with several old friends at a designated campsite. On the whole, I prefer a much less planned outing than this, and will often wild camp, only seeking out campsites for a wash and brush up every other day. But at £9 a night, I could hardly say no, could I? Compare this to the coast, where even a moderately scenic spot in the high season can cost as much as £27 a night, and £9 would barely buy you a strawberry mivvy. Staffordshire and Derbyshire are undoubtedly beautiful counties, once you get away from the towns. The A444, while somewhat winding and considerably longer than the motorway, made for a scenic journey up there. On the whole, campervan owners have a real aversion to motorways, for numerous reasons, but principally it's about choosing not to hurry and really enjoying the back roads. Well, it was pleasant enough until we reached Burton-upon-Trent. Burton has its own rules. Direction signs are quite evidently superfluous, if not a hindrance to Burtonians. They care not for them, nor require them, settling for, presumably, an entirely more vague approach to travel that the rest of us can only marvel at. A mecca for beer drinkers, Burton may be, but navigating Burton and getting to where you need to go with any kind of certainty proved challenging, adding an extra hour to the entire journey. In the end, I gave up and adopted an equally vague approach to finding the correct road north, and amazingly stumbled upon it. Clearly the locals know a thing or two. Finally, with the sun low in the sky, we reached the picturesque village of Hartington, and I almost screeched to a halt at the sight of a fish and chip wagon in the square. I convinced myself that having escaped Burton, cooking on the first night might be arduous and beset by unexpected disasters, so mushy peas would do us. Hartington is remarkably well kept, although somewhat unreal. One imagines it was created entirely to grace biscuit tins and tea towels. It was granted a market charter in 1203, and until more recent years was home to Nuttall's Creamery, once a source of Stilton and Buxton blue cheese. As we sat on a bench weighing up the scene and making comparisons to Camberwick Green, we noticed that there is a cheese shop in the village. My son, being a Monty Python fan, launched into the cheese shop sketch, but before he could finish, we were reliably informed by our purveyor of sausage and chips that none of the cheeses are now made there. We settled for the chips in protest. A few miles on, we arrived at our destination, Holme End, and began unpacking the bikes I'd strapped to the back and pulled down the bed in readiness for the night. Holme End can best be described as a hamlet. 10 miles north of Ashbourne, it sits in the Peak District National Park. Although technically in Staffordshire, Holme End has a Derbyshire postal address. Clearly it has big ambitions. The old Manifold Valley Light Railway starts here, or what remains of it. Today the track forms an encouragingly flat and popular cycle path, winding its way just over 8 miles through breathtaking scenery to waterhouses. Along the way are cafes and ice cream vendors for those that seek suitable watering holes. It can be surprising at just how much unfolds from a seemingly small space with nooks and crannies to store all manner of things. Each camper owner adapts their interior to their own needs with ingenious solutions to problems that they've encountered at one time or another out in the sticks. I watched as others spent hours with levelling chocks, attempting to get a near-perfect landing on the undulating slope. I simply drove around until the horizon looked more or less level, pulled on the handbrake, and we were done. As a group, we discussed many things that evening over a pint or 5, but one subject that came up was the plethora of wonder gadgets that can be bought these days, often making outrageous claims. It is well known amongst campervan owners, and indeed caravanners, that it can be foolhardy to go to a caravan accessory shop in a carefree manner with spare cash, lest you come out laden down with things that either don't work as you expected or just simply sit there gathering dust. For instance, I have a small solar panel that trickle charges your battery when you're parked up. Mine was given to me by a school friend called Dave Fitzgerald. He was well-meaning and even added that he thought of me when he handed me the package. I was always a little sceptical, given its size, that it actually did anything at all. However, I fitted it as suggested on the packaging and just let it trickle away. Well, the indicator light certainly came on, and whenever the sun appeared, this little light would flash away enthusiastically at me, proof, if anyone needed, that electricity was indeed being generated. My battery was safe, and I was at one with nature. 2 years later at Holme End, I uncovered the truth. A friend from Chester reached for his test meter and began to find out just what this modern marvel actually produced, whilst I made a fuss of his dog Scamp. Well, I won't go into the technical stuff, but according to our rudimentary scribblings using Ohm's law, we calculated that it generated enough power to, you've guessed it, make the indicator light come on. In fact, it couldn't even generate enough power to even irritate a passing woodlouse, let alone charge a basic mobile phone. Well, unless you were happy to wait a fortnight for it to do so, and that was on the proviso that you had full blaring sun throughout. That evening, the sky, being devoid of the glare from city lights, was spectacular. It was pointed out to me that on a clear night such as this, you can see satellites with the naked eye, and after waiting patiently, I spotted one. They move fairly briskly, taking around a minute to go from one horizon to the other. The sight of 2 grown men marvelling over the hemisphere did not impress my son in the slightest. He had already found a friend and was busy discussing the latest computer game. Scamp seemed equally uninterested and merely sighed. An hour later, with a kettle on and a tea bag at the ready, I flipped on the overnight heater, ready for bed. Sleeping in the campervan is actually far more comfortable than my own bed at home. I've never quite worked out why this is. The next day we packed up and headed down to Melton Mowbray, not in search of pies, but to meet up with some other friends at a steam fair in a place called Stapleford. Whilst not a steam fanatic, I do like trains and enjoy the sounds and smell of coal. Stapleford boasts a rather good miniature railway with around 2 miles of track. It runs around a lake and through some 500 acres of ground that at first glance looks as though Capability Brown may have had a hand in it, until you hear the word 4 and realise that a good part of it is actually a golf course. We seem to pick a poor spot to camp though, with a rather snooty woman in a caravan next to us, the size of a cricket pavilion, the caravan, not her, My attempts to break the ice were all met with stony silence, so I gave up and contented myself with talking loudly about a particularly troublesome tropical disease I was struggling to shift. She immediately vanished into a caravan and stayed there. The weather moved from bright sunshine to fair, and finally torrential rain. As most of us have pulled down awnings, this wasn't really a problem, and we finished off several mugs of tea, watching damp golfers squelch their way back to their cars. On the other side of the field, traction engines and steam-powered fairground organs chugged away amongst rows of highly polished lawn-mowers. Each to their own, I suppose, and after all, someone, somewhere, has to love a 2-horsepower Briggs & Stratton. We are in a modern world, though, and seem to like to pigeonhole everyone and everything. These days we would probably categorise steam enthusiasts as having OCD or some rare malady, but the truth is, without people of passion, innovation simply would not exist. Hail the unfettered eccentric, I say. The engines on the Stapleford line, small as they might be, can belt along at some speed, and at £2 a trip compete rather well with Network Rail, even if the destination looks incredibly like the starting point. Part way along the line is a plaque commemorating the day when Steed and Emma Peel filmed a sequence for an episode of The Avengers called The Gravediggers. Since the 60s, the track has been upgraded and a lengthy tunnel added to help concentrate the smell of coal smoke for asthmatic passengers and scare the living daylights out of timid youngsters. All good fun. And next weekend, Proctor's Park, a kind of long-forgotten hidey-high holiday camp, which had seen better days even in the 1970s, and where entertainment is, well, whatever board game you brought with you. Variety? Definitely. For me, though, it is pleasing to know that these days out will ultimately become wonderful memories that will last my son a complete lifetime. Priceless.